Supreme Court has directed Delhi government to immediately initiate criminal proceedings against DDA officials with regards to felling of trees in the Delhi Ridge area. That is, of course, the green lung of the national capital. And the Supreme Court had, in fact, been hearing this petition, which had focused on the large number of trees which have been cut in that area. For more on this, let me go across to my colleague Sunil Prabhu. Sunil, what is the order which has come out from the Supreme Court on this matter today?
Well, it's actually 11,000 trees that were cut, and it's you've seen Delhi has had one of the worst summers in recent times. Climate change is there, and how did these trees get cut in DDA land? Who should be held responsible? That is why the Supreme Court has issued notice, and they must apply to the contempt notice no less than the vice chairman of DDA. And who are these officials? How did they do it? And also to the Delhi tree officer, and to find out and take stock of the wood, and ask them to the principal secretary of forests to respond to this. They are playing with the environment, and this is something that cannot be done. And that is why the Supreme Court has taken a very, very strong view on this matter. And I've asked them all to come clean, whether the VC was the one who did it or did it come from above. All these questions will have to be answered. And how did they do it? And whose directions did these trees get cut? These are things that need to be answered. The Delhi's Ridge is a protected zone, protected by no other than the Supreme Court. And there are very clear guidelines that have to be followed. How did it happen? These are the questions that the Supreme Court has asked.
Right. Sunil, the exact number of trees being cut, of course, is something that the court is looking at the moment. Let me go across to Vimlendhu Jha, who is environmentalist, who is joining us on the broadcast. Vimlendhu, you've seen a clear direction coming in from the Supreme Court on this matter, asking for criminal proceedings to be initiated against the Delhi Development Authority officials. Remember, this is with regard to a contempt case where, despite Supreme Court saying that there should be an absolute pause, a halt on tree felling activities in the ridge area, the DDO officials had gone ahead and continued with cutting trees in that area. So now the Supreme Court has taken a very strong stand and asked for criminal proceedings to be initiated against the DDO officials. Do you welcome this move? Is this the kind of example that needs to be set when it comes to protecting our environment?
Absolutely. I think responsibility needs to be fixed, because we've seen time and again, there's no accountability, there's no responsibility. Delhi, which is one of the most polluted capitals of the world, Delhi, whose AQI is perpetually poor and bad and severe and hazardous. And despite all of that, and right now, imagine last 1 month, we've been reeling under extreme heat wave, and there's almost like a heat island. And rather than doing the needful, it's the government that is actually going around cutting trees without any permission against the directions of the Supreme Court. Supreme Court had clearly said that there should be no felling of trees that should be allowed. And despite that, in the protected area of Ridge, by the way, this is not some colony or roadside tree that's been butchered or felled by any private citizen. It's the government that's in complete violation of Supreme Court's order and direction. If you look at the proceedings, the way it's actually gone last 2 days, Supreme Court has taken seriously and is almost very close to really making LG responsible, because apparently, if you look at the entire proceedings, it was LG who actually directed for felling of these trees, because it was perhaps inconvenient for him when he was passing through that area. And in the direction right now today, of course, Delhi government has also been made a party. There's been a notice that's been issued to them because there's something called a tree authority that is supposed to meet every 6 months. None of those meetings ever take place. Delhi, we've seen thousands and thousands of trees being cut down in last several years, in the name of development, in the name of convenience, and no accountability is fixed. So hope this time when the Supreme Court is actually talking about, starting a criminal proceeding, actually it really does something, because the government class, the executive actually gets away by doing these kind of criminal acts, because it is criminal. At the end of the day, when we say murder, we only think of murder through a weapon. But when you take air away, clean air away, or impose heat wave on the citizens of Delhi, take its water away because of killing its environment, it's actually more than a murder. It's mass murder. And it's high time that criminal proceedings are initiated against these people who are supposed to be sitting and are paid by the taxpayers' money.
Thus, let me also read out some of the other operative parts of the order which has come through, and very strong observations from the Supreme Court, where the court has in fact said that while issuing contempt notice against the DDA vice president, the court adds that it does not mean that we want him to go to jail, but that he should tell who actually was the person issuing orders to cut the trees, that the DDA should come to court with clean hands, that if the top official has done something wrong, then there is no harm to admitting it, but the truth must come out. So these are some of the words which have come out from the top court today, essentially pushing for accountability in this particular case. Vimlendu, we've also seen the Supreme Court actually looking at other remedial measures as well, whether or not the Delhi government or the DDA can carry out a plantation drive, but clearly seeking for action steps for from the government to reverse the situation that we are staring at right now.
Absolutely. So, government is actually, the Supreme Court also was talking about compensatory plantation, but at the same time, the Supreme Court has made observations that translocating the trees or compensatory plantation cannot be, an answer to the kind of environment that we are actually facing. When you actually when you cull 100-year-old tree and thousands of them, and then you end up planting perhaps some saplings, for which also there's no audit done as in terms of how many of those saplings have actually survived. So you cut a tree in one part of Delhi and end up planting some saplings of tulsi plants or shrubs, perhaps 100 kilometers away. That's not an answer. The government always, in the name of development, hides behind compensatory plantation. Compensatory plantation has actually failed. If you look at the entire study done in last 10 years, also, it was Delhi government that actually came up with this plan of, rather than cutting a tree, we actually would translocate a tree to some other area. All of this is farce. It's actually pseudoscience. It doesn't exist. It cannot compensate. You cannot compensate cutting a full-grown tree and thousands of them. And in lieu of that, perhaps you would plant 1 lakh trees or 10 lakh trees. That's what the government keeps claiming. But reality is that there's a huge tree loss in the capital of Delhi, capital of India, and everywhere else as well. I think it's high time Supreme Court takes cognizance of this, because there's a similar situation that's actually happening in Dehradun. We've seen situation and activists standing up in Bangalore, in many other parts. As you know, right now, imagine in climate change era, when India is actually witnessing extreme climate events, extreme heat wave situation, drought-like situation, rather than actually being more protective of its environment and look at taking absolute measures, it's going around cutting trees for some bureaucrats or some ministers or some constitutional authorities' convenience. This particular case the Supreme Court is hearing is about LG ordering. The Lieutenant Governor of Delhi actually ordered cutting of these trees, and its officers are right now not able to name him. And that's exactly what the Supreme Court and the Justice has been implying all through the hearing last 2 days as well.
Right, Vimlendu, one way of tackling this situation is what the Supreme Court is actually stressing on today, that is of accountability, like who is that officer, even if it's a senior officer from the Delhi Development Authority, which decided to overrule, to disregard the Supreme Court order on this matter and still continue with the tree cutting activity in that area. What, according to you, are the steps that the government must now follow, or what can in fact be done in order to ensure that this sort of indiscriminate tree felling doesn't take place again?
See, there's already an order in place, wherefore no trees can be cut in Delhi. There's an absolute order. In fact, the reason why Supreme Court is actually hearing this matter in terms of contempt and suo motu contempt hearing that is going on is because against the directions of the Supreme Court, because Supreme Court clearly said that Delhi, you cannot cut any tree anymore. And despite that, in the protected forest, as I said earlier, the only solution to this is that the government listens to the order, because on its own, it doesn't feel it's responsible and doesn't feel accountability and responsibility towards the citizens of Delhi or Delhi's environment. It's actually, at least if it follows the Supreme Court's direction, and that's the reason why it's really heartening to hear that there is a criminal proceeding that will go against the Babus who have actually allowed this to happen, or saw or looked the other way in terms of not taking responsibility. So it's if you just look at Delhi's environment, rather than really protecting and doing more, you should not be taking away what already exists, which is the only lung that we actually have for citizens of Delhi.